It's my body. You don't get to demand anything from me. My name is Derek Langston. I'm 33, and I've been teaching third grade at Westfield Elementary in Kansas City, Missouri for 8 years. My wife, Madison, said those words just 5 weeks. And 2 days into our marriage, in that entire time she hadn't let me touch her. Not a lingering kiss, not a simple touch while watching a movie, nothing. I sat on our couch, the same brown leather one I'd bought when I thought I'd be alone, forever trying to make sense of it. We dated for 14 months, talked about everything, and were intimate before the wedding. We'd even lived together for 6 months. But the moment we said I do at St. Catherine's Chapel, something changed. Madison, I'm not demanding anything, I said, trying to stay calm. I'm just asking why you won't even kiss me goodnight. She turned back to her phone, scrolling without looking up. I told you, my body, my choice. That phrase had become her answer to everything. Why she slept in the guest room. Why she pulled her hand away at dinner with my parents. Why she refused to celebrate our first month of marriage. I respect that completely, I said, but we're married, I thought. ... double quotes. You thought wrong. Wait. She didn't even look up. I went to the kitchen and made myself a turkey and Swiss sandwich, the same one I'd been eating for lunch at school for months. As I stood there, I realized a comment she'd made during premarital counseling had been gnawing at me. She'd said, marriage was about security and partnership, not just physical stuff. At the time, I thought she meant a deep, emotional connection. But now, staring at the empty mayonnaise jar I'd forgotten to replace, I realized I'd missed something crucial. The woman in our living room felt like a stranger. The Madison I dated would curl up next to me, laugh at my terrible jokes, and make coffee for me while I graded papers on Saturday mornings. This Madison acted like I was a barely tolerated roommate. The coldness in her voice when she said, "You thought wrong," made me fear this wasn't temporary. This was the plan all along. I met Madison 2 years ago at a teacher's conference. She was a social worker for the school district, handling the difficult family situations teachers like. Me couldn't navigate alone. She was quiet and thoughtful, and when she smiled, it felt earned. Our first date was coffee, and we talked for 3 hours. She told me about her parents' divorce and learning early on that people weren't always what they seemed. How teaching had saved me after a dark period in my life. Everything felt right. She fit into my life effortlessly, and my mother loved her immediately. But looking back, I could see the red flags I'd ignored. She was vague about our future. When we moved in together, she insisted on separate bank accounts and splitting every expense down the middle. Even though I made more money during our engagement, she seemed more focused on the wedding details than on the marriage itself. When I mentioned having kids, she'd simply say, "We'll see." The biggest red flag came in our final counseling session with Pastor Williams. I talked about building a family. Madison said she was looking forward to having a stable foundation to build her career goals from. I thought she was just being practical. Watching her scroll through her phone, I realized she wasn't being practical. She was being honest. She'd married me for stability, not love. The intimacy she'd shown me during our relationship was just a performance to close the deal. The breaking point was a Tuesday night in November. After we ate in silence, she immediately retreated to the guest room. I sat in the living room, staring at our wedding photos, and remembered that Pastor Williams had recorded our counseling sessions for his notes. I called him the next morning. "Is everything all right?" he asked. "I don't think so," I said. I think Madison may have been dishonest about her intentions. I need to know if those recordings still exist. There was a long pause. "Son, that's a serious accusation." "What makes you think ... She told me last night she never intended to have a physical relationship with me after we got married," I said, my voice shaking. "She said she married me for security, not love." "Derek," he said, his voice dropping. "Yes, I still have the recordings. You both signed forms consenting to them, so they could potentially be used as evidence." That evening, I sat in my car for 20 minutes before going inside. Madison was in the kitchen. "Madison, we need to talk," I said. She didn't look up from the stove. "About what?" About what you said in counseling about marriage being about security, not physical intimacy. She turned around, and for the first time in weeks I had her full attention. What about it? Pastor Williams recorded. Those sessions, I said. You said things in there that contradict everything you're telling me now. Her face went pale. You wouldn't what? Actually use them against you? Those were conversations where you admitted to planning exactly what you've done to our marriage. I looked at the woman I'd promised to love and realized I didn't recognize her at all. Madison, did you ever intend to have a real marriage with me? I gave you what I promised a wife, a partnership. If you expected more, that's your problem. I nodded slowly. Okay, what? Okay, I understand. Now. I walked to our bedroom, pulled out my laptop, and began researching annulment procedures in Missouri. If Madison wanted a business arrangement, she was about to learn that business arrangements could be dissolved when one party committed fraud. I filed the annulment petition on a Friday morning. The grounds were fraud and misrepresentation. I hand-delivered the papers to Madison that evening. She read through them twice, then looked up with a rage I'd never seen before. You're actually doing this over sex. This isn't about sex, Madison. It's about honesty. You lied to me about the kind of marriage you wanted. I never lied. I told you I valued stability and partnership. You told Pastor Williams that physical intimacy wasn't important to you in marriage. You said you were marrying me because I was safe and stable, not because you loved me. You said those exact words. Her face went white. Those sessions were supposed to be confidential. They were confidential until you decided to break our marriage vows 5 weeks after we made them. That weekend, Madison spent hours on the phone. On Monday morning, she was waiting for me in the kitchen with coffee and toast, the first breakfast she'd made since our honeymoon. Derek, I think we got off on the wrong foot. Marriage is an adjustment. Maybe we can work through this. I looked at the woman who had refused to touch me for a month, now suddenly interested in reconciliation the moment legal papers were involved. What changed your mind? I realized I may have been too harsh. Physical intimacy is important. We can work on it. Moment I almost believed her. But then I remembered her words. If you expected more than that, that's your problem. Madison, why are you changing your tune now? I'm trying to save our marriage. No, I said, gently removing her hand from my arm. You're trying to avoid the legal consequences of fraud. Her face hardened again. Fine. You want to do this the hard way? My lawyer says you'll never prove fraud. He says the court will see this as a man trying to punish his wife for exercising her bodily autonomy. I nodded slowly. Okay. I understand the strategy. You're going to paint me as controlling and abusive, but the truth is the truth. That evening I called my own attorney, Janet Morris. I have recordings of her admitting she married me for financial security, not love, I told her. She explicitly stated that physical intimacy wasn't part of her expectations. Janet was quiet for a moment. In that case, you might have a stronger case than your wife's attorney realizes. The next morning, I drove to Pastor Williams' office to get the recordings. He handed me an envelope. I reviewed the sessions after you called. There are things Madison said that I didn't fully understand at the time, but they make more sense now. I sat in my empty classroom and listened to 6 hours of recordings. What I heard changed everything. In one session, Madison said she preferred relationships where she could maintain her independence and focus on her career goals. She described what she was looking for in a husband. Someone stable who won't make emotional demands on me. Someone who will provide security without expecting me to be something I'm not. When the pastor pressed her, she said she hoped I would adapt to her being not a physically affectionate person. The most damning part came from our final session. She explained to Pastor Williams that she intended to maintain separate sleeping arrangements after marriage and hoped I would understand that physical intimacy wasn't a priority for her. When asked if she'd discussed this with me, she said, "Not directly, but I've given him signals. If he hasn't picked up on them, we'll address it after the wedding." I turned off the recording and sat in the dark for an hour. Madison hadn't just lied. She'd planned the entire deception from the beginning. She'd counted on me being too nice, too accommodating to demand honesty. She wanted a roommate who would split the bills and provide social respectability. But she made one crucial mistake. She'd been honest about her plan to Pastor Williams, thinking those conversations would never see the light of day. I spent the weekend organizing evidence. On Monday, I met with Janet Morris. She listened to the recordings, taking notes, and occasionally shaking her head. When we finished, she leaned back and looked at me with amazement. Derek, in 20 years of family law, I've never seen such clear evidence of premarital fraud. Your wife essentially admitted to multiple instances of intentional deception. What does that mean for the annulment case? I asked. It means we're not just going to win. We're going to win decisively. That evening, Madison cooked dinner, pot roast, homemade bread, and apple pie. Derek, I've been thinking, maybe we can go to counseling together and fix this. I took a bite of the excellent meal. Madison, why now? Why didn't you want to build something real 2 months ago? I told you I was scared. No, I said quietly. You weren't scared. You got exactly what you wanted. A husband who would pay half the bills and leave you alone. That's not true. I pulled out my phone and played a 30-second clip from one of the sessions. Madison's voice filled the dining room. ... I need someone who understands that I'm not a physically affectionate person. I can be a good wife in terms of partnership and household management. But I don't want to be pushed into romantic expectations that don't come naturally to me. Her face went white. You can't use those. Those were private. They were conversations where you admitted to planning exactly what you've done to our marriage. What I want is an honest marriage, and you've already proven that's something you can't provide. The court hearing took place on a cold morning in January. Madison's attorney argued I was trying to punish her for her bodily autonomy. Then Janet stood up. Your Honor, I'd like to present audio evidence that directly contradicts the defense's characterization of this case. She played the selected excerpts from the counseling sessions. The courtroom was silent as Madison's voice calmly explained her plan to deceive me. Judge Henderson asked to hear the recordings again, then looked directly at Madison. Mrs. Langston, these recordings suggest that you entered into this marriage with no intention of fulfilling basic marital obligations, and that you deliberately concealed this from your husband. Do you dispute the authenticity of these recordings? Madison's attorney whispered to her, but she shook her head. No, Your Honor. Honest with Pastor Williams, but not with your husband, the judge said. Judge Henderson granted the annulment without hesitation. She ruled that Madison had committed fraud by concealing her true intentions and ordered her to return all wedding gifts and pay all court costs and attorney fees. Marriage is a legal contract based on mutual understanding and good faith, the judge declared. When one party deliberately deceives the other about fundamental aspects of that contract, they bear responsibility for the consequences. As we left the courthouse, Madison tried to speak to me one last time. Derek, I'm sorry. I never meant for it to go this far. I looked at her for what I knew would be the last time. Madison, you meant for it to go exactly this far. I just didn't expect to get caught. Within a month, the truth had spread. The teachers at school, my friends, everyone now understood. Madison's reputation at the school district suffered significantly, and her supervisor quietly suggested she might be happier in a different department. 6 months later, I heard she had moved back to Illinois, unable to rebuild her professional credibility. For me, the experience taught me something valuable: the difference between being understanding and being naive. I'd confuse Madison's emotional unavailability with depth, her calculation with thoughtfulness. When I eventually started dating again, I knew to look for someone who could be honest about what they wanted. Madison had wanted security without commitment, partnership without intimacy, and marriage without love. What she got instead was a public demonstration that fraud has consequences, even in matters of the heart. Sometimes the most important lesson isn't about love, it's about truth.